Tariffs. Not just a tax on imports, tariffs have been monumental in shaping America's foreign policy since its creation. Now, today, some may find them controversial. Others may find them something to praise. But today, we're going to talk about how tariffs have shaped some of America's most brutal conflicts. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into how tariffs have shaped America's history, only on Alpha Perspective. Our first example, well, anybody could have guessed it, the War of 1812, the War of Trade, the war that pretty much shaped America's position as a young country. Now, in 1807, Britain imposed a blockade on French ports during the Napoleonic Wars, effectively prohibiting trade between the United States and France. Now, in retaliation, Napoleon issued the Berlin Decree in 1806, blocking British trade with European ports. This created a dire situation for American merchants, who realized both Britain and France were crucial trading partners. Now, caught in the middle of escalating economic warfare, U.S. merchants were faced with severe disruptions, and as a result, American merchants lost access to European markets, crippling the young nation's economy. But Britain went beyond just restrictions. Britain escalated tensions further by engaging what is called impressment, the practice of conscripting American sailors into the Royal Navy. This blatant violation of U.S. sovereignty outraged many Americans. In response to these aggressions, President Thomas Jefferson sought to exert economic pressure rather than resort to military action. In December of 1807, the United States passed the Embargo Act, which banned all American trade with foreign nations. Now, Jefferson hoped this strategy of economic coercion would force the British and the French to respect American neutrality. However, the embargo proved disastrous for the United States economy. According to economic historian Douglas Irwin, the embargo of 1807 cost Americans roughly 5% of their gross national product. Prior to this implementation, the United States had been exporting approximately $108 million worth of goods. But within 1 year, exports plunged to $80 million, representing a staggering 75% decline. By 1808, U.S. exports to Europe had fallen from 50 million to just 8 million, an unsustainable blow to the U.S. economy. Now, with American commerce in turmoil and tensions with Britain continuing to rise, resentment grew. The United States had already fought for independence just a generation earlier and had engaged in a quasi-war with France over maritime disputes. Now, with British trade restrictions, tariffs, impressment of American sailors, and support for Native American independence in the North, tensions had reached a breaking point. By 1812, economic sanctions, well, they had failed. And the United States, humiliated and economically strained, saw no other alternative but to go to war. So, in June of 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain, marking the beginning of the War of 1812. Next, the Civil War and the Tariff of Abominations. Now, I know what you're thinking. Caleb, it's Black History Month, and you're meaning to tell me that the Civil War was caused by tariffs? No, the Civil War was not solely caused by tariffs, but tariffs did play a distinct role in making disagreements between the North and South more prominent. Now, for a little context, the South's economy was heavily reliant on imports from Europe, and that's because their economy was focused on exporting raw cotton, and they didn't really have the manufacturing capability to produce a lot of the goods themselves. While the South imported finished products, they exported cotton to Europe in order to fuel their textile mills. One of the most contentious issues that arose was the quote-unquote Tariff of Abominations in 1828. The North, with their growing industry, supported high protective tariffs to protect its factories from losing business to Europe-imported goods, while the South strongly opposed these tariffs, arguing that they unfairly hurt their agricultural economy. The tariff made important goods more expensive. South Carolina, in particular, took issue with the tariff, claiming that it was unconstitutional and economically damaging. While there isn't an exact figure for the financial burden that the tariff imposed on the South, it clearly had a significant impact. For example, duties on items like hemp jumped from $35 to $45 per ton, driving up the cost of imports the South depended on. This also had a ripple effect, as higher costs discouraged British imports, which in turn hurt Southern exports. This growing economic divide over tariffs, along with other issues, fueled sectionalism between the North and South. Ultimately, the tensions contributed to the secession of Southern states and played a significant role in the outbreak of the Civil War. The Opium Wars. Wow, this one sounds interesting. In the early 19th century, China maintained a trade surplus with Britain, meaning that Britain imported more goods from China than it exported. This led to a drain of silver from Britain to China, which the British were eager to reverse. At the time, British merchants, particularly the East India Company, were facing restrictions on trading in China, where the Qing dynasty tightly controlled foreign trade and only allowed it to occur in certain ports like Canton. To address this trade imbalance and recoup some of the silver flowing out of Britain, British merchants began importing opium from India to China. The opium trade became highly profitable for the British, but it was devastating to Chinese society, as widespread addiction led to social and economic problems. The Qing dynasty, recognizing the harm caused by opium, attempted to curtail its importation and consumption by imposing strict regulations and tariffs. However, British merchants, backed by their government, were determined to continue the opium trade. In response to the Chinese crackdown on opium, including the seizure and the destruction of large quantities of it, Britain used military force in order to protect its trade interests. This escalated into the First Opium Wars of 1839 through 1842, which ultimately resulted in China being forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking. This treaty gained Britain more access to trade ports and their rights, effectively opening up China to greater foreign influence in trade, including the opium trade. Now, for the Second Opium War, and yeah, oh boy, there was another. It was primarily rooted in the same cause of Britain trying to protect its own trade interests. Rooted in the British desire to maintain and expand trade privileges, these tariffs and other trade restrictions were central to the ongoing conflict. Britain, again supported by France, sought to compel China to accept even more liberal trade terms, which included lower tariffs on foreign goods and the legalization of the opium trade. Now, while the United States wasn't directly involved in the Opium Wars, its interests in China were affected by the outcomes of the conflict. During the First Opium Wars, the United States was a neutral party, but it had a vested interest in the treaty negotiations that followed. The U.S. quickly negotiated its own treaty with China, known as the Treaty of Wangia, which established a framework for trade and diplomatic relations. It granted America the same privileges as the British, and it opened up several Chinese ports to American trade. This agreement also addressed the opium trade indirectly, as it assured American merchants had the same access to trade as the British, though the opium trade itself was largely British-driven. The Mexican-American War. Tariffs played a crucial role in the lead-up to the Mexican-American War and was also a pivotal point of tensions between the two nations. After Mexico gained its independence from Spain, it faced economic challenges and imposed tariffs in order to protect its industries and raise revenue. However, these tariffs frustrated many American merchants, especially along the Texas-Mexico border, who sought freer access to Mexican markets. The economic friction intensified after the annexation of Texas by the United States in 1845. Mexico had never fully recognized Texas's independence, and the U.S. annexation exasperated the situation. In retaliation, Mexico broke off diplomatic relations and imposed economic sanctions, including tariffs and trade restrictions on U.S. goods. This disruption, of course, heightened tensions between both sides, contributed to the broader tension that led to the outbreak of war. Now, for a little broader context, the United States expansionism under the idea of manifest destiny was pretty much the primary result of the conflict, with the United States claiming the Rio Grande as the southern border and Mexico insisting otherwise. While tariffs were not the direct cause of the Mexican-American War, they made tensions between the two countries more likely. The economic frustration caused by trade restrictions, coupled with the United States' desire for territorial expansion, fueled the tensions that ultimately led to the war. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more updates about videos on American history.